you two?
Confirm.
Let me know.
Just a little there, sorry. Okay, we're live.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. We've just concluded our executive session and now in the public session portion of our meeting. Before we get into matters on the agenda, I just wanted to make a brief statement with regard to some recent work in connection to the Passaic Street Bridge closure. I did want to recognize the police department administrator and staff in making excellent preparations with regard to the forthcoming closure of the bridge due to anticipated construction, recognizing the potential impacts due to that construction work on traffic flow and quality of life. As you may or may not know, a temporary traffic signal was installed at the intersection of Fairmount and River to better manage the anticipated traffic counts. The police department is doing an admirable job, and they're continuing to monitor the flow of traffic and making adjustments to cycle times in order to optimize vehicular flow. There are material changes to traffic patterns and regrettably some impact to the immediate surrounding area, but I would like everyone to know that we are listening to residents and their concerns and aware of the developing situation. The department and staff are monitoring and continually looking to optimize the conditions there in order to mitigate the quality of life. We thank you for your patience and understanding. We continue to receive your comments and concerns, and we will do our very best to direct the police department and other personnel to best handle that. So thank you. We'll now move on to the first hearing of citizens. Mr. LeConte, could you kindly provide guidance?
Members of the public are now welcome to come up to the microphone to address the Township Committee. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to be heard about issues which are not topics scheduled for public hearings tonight. Those present may step up to the microphone to be heard. If you're watching via Zoom, you may speak during any of the public comment sessions followed by following the Zoom instructions to raise your hand. Whether in person or online, when you are recognized to speak, please mind the following procedures. Please say your name, spell your last name, and give the name of your street. You do not need to give your street number. All public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Rather than use any of your time answering questions, the Township Committee will wait until you finish speaking before responding. There are 2 public comment sessions on tonight's agenda. Each member of the public will be limited to 1 comment of up to 3 minutes during each public comment period. Written comments submitted to the Township Clerk before 3 p.m. today will be read during the public comment sessions. Written comments are subject to the same guidelines as oral comments. Duplicative written comments may be summarized rather than read in full, according to guidelines issued by the New Jersey Division of Local Government Services. And I do not have any written comments from the public for tonight.
Mr. LeConte, do we have anyone online?
We do not have any hands raised.
Wonderful, thank you. At this time, I now invite anyone in the audience to step forward to the mic, should they desire to say a few words. I see no one coming before the mic. I shall now close the first hearing of citizens. This evening, we've got a single resolution for consideration. Mr. Shahadi.
You want me to read the resolution for the appointments?
Yes, please.
So this resolution for the appointments concerns some vacancies that require the governing body's consent. Typically, at a workshop meeting, we would take this action, but so that way the zoning board is not precluded from continuing their business or possibly delayed as a result of lack of quorum. We're taking this action tonight, so that way they can proceed as expeditiously as possible.
Thank you. Yes. The resolutions for the appointment of a particular individual for a zoning board of adjustments. She's a resident with children in the school systems. She's a licensed architect, so she's got highly relevant experience that would benefit matters before the zoning board. She'd be highly contributory, so I think she'd be an excellent addition. She's been serving in this capacity previously, so we certainly welcome her with open arms. I understand that there would be forthcoming considerations, as well as I think we've got an alternate spot or so still available. But in the interest of bodying up the boards and committees as quickly as possible so they can continue start their work in their first meetings, I did want to put this resolution before the committee.
We'll need a motion and a second to adopt the resolution.
Yes, do I have a motion?
I move to adopt resolution 2025-63.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. LeConte?
Mr. Alperowitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Ewald?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Rowland?
Yes.
And Mayor Choi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We now proceed to committee reports. Departmental reports.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, I'd like to start with engineering, since we have our engineer here, and would like to get him out
Certainly.
as
Thank
quickly
you.
as possible.
Welcome, Mr. Rushkey.
Thank you. So on the coming agendas for that would fall under engineering, the scope of engineering are two change orders. One is for the roof replacement at DPW, and the other one is for improvements at Pine Street. The memos for both should be included in your agenda packet explaining those. With respect to the DPW roof replacement, some issues uncovered through the process that we want to address to bring it up to code, and it's a safety issue, a minor change order, and then for Pine Street, it's actually a reduction, correct, John?
Correct.
So that's a good change order. Any question on either of those two? Okay, so we will have those ordinances on for the next meeting. For discussion and action, specifically I asked John to come here to speak to you about the sewer service area, and this was a memo that you received, I want to say at the November meeting. The November meeting. It was something that we felt required a little bit more time to reflect upon, and then John would come here to answer any questions that you may have, and so that's why John's here.
And there's one other item, what you want to talk about,
The minor site plans, yeah, so we could, the other one was the minor site
Yeah,
plan.
we could start with the sewer
possible.
service area first. So, modification of a sewer service area, it can get complicated if you're trying to expand the sewer service area. There's a lot of justification with that, with the DEP. But to retract a sewer service area, it's less cumbersome of a process. You still have to go through all the steps that are necessary and prepare all the documentation that comply with the regulatory requirements. There's multiple maps that need to be prepared. But ultimately, the fact that we're looking at an area that is prominently the area is a lot of steep slopes, and there's a lot. If on one side it's steep slopes, on the other side of the road you have the floodplain of the Passaic River, and so and a substantial amount of wetlands. And so this would really be something that would go I would envision be going very quickly through the DEP if we wanted to remove this area from the sewer service area. It wouldn't be too difficult to do. There is a number of steps that has to go through, and ultimately there's a public comment period, and there's a public it ultimately is posted in the New Jersey Registrar to identify this as a formal revision. So there is opportunities for the public to provide comment, but just say that public comment period, it's unless the residents are notified, they're not going to know that something's published in the New Jersey Registrar and her comment. So it may be something that if we do want to go forward with this, the committee may want to do something above and beyond to let the residents know that we're taking this action. It's just a suggestion. Now, there are certainly options that could be considered. This section of River Road, over the years, there has been several residents that inquired if sewers are going to be installed primarily when their sewer fails and they're looking at options, and sometimes it's very expensive to put a septic system in. And so we've had residents over the years inquire and had an interest in extending sewers, but there really was never an organized fashion of people coming in as a group and doing it. It's really been sporadic on people doing that. Most sewer extensions in town has really been initiated by residents approaching us in an organized way, saying, hey, we're interested in doing this, expanding the sewers like Johnson Road and other roads that we've done, Kansas. It's really has been, the public has come to us and asked us to evaluate it and look at the options there. So there really hasn't been a uniform interest. It was usually just sporadic people inquiring when they change their septic systems over. With the this area, we can approach it in different ways. Modifying the sewer service area does not have to be just let's just take out the entire chunk of land. You can also modify it so that if there's an interest in just putting a corridor off the roadway so you can capture the homes, or you can even just put boxes around the existing homes. That's also been done. So there's things that could be done if we still wanted to offer sewer service areas to the existing homes, or we can just take out the sewer area altogether. So there is some variability that how we can approach this.
John, in terms of process, are you familiar with the state plan process that's going on right now?
Yes, to a degree. Yeah.
Not that you need to get it too far into it, but would that process be something that would replace the process that you're talking about?
No, you still, the DEP, when they review sewer service areas, is a separate process. They don't overlap. And so certainly looking at the planning area as this being an environmental sensitive area, DEP will just acknowledge that. But certainly that doesn't have to be a component of us applying for it. I think that this area is already environmentally restricted with the steep slopes, with the wetlands, with the floodplain, that this is something that if we were going through, every few years, the DEP does go through the revisits the whole wastewater management plan, and you have to look at it. And in fact, if we were going through that major revision or review, they would be taking sections of this area out too. They would be taking out all the wetlands. They would be taking out all the floodplains. So even if we wait 10 years when that happens, it's not on a regular basis, but when that happens next within this sewer area, this district, they'll be taking these areas out anyway.
Sorry, on that point, so we're looking at River Road, Fairmount to Passaic.
Correct.
So when you're saying because of the wetlands, floodplains, which is the lower end,
Correct.
they would take that area out anyway?
They would take that. They always, they would take those areas out if we didn't do anything in the future. Eventually, when they revisit this sewer service area for the entire county, then they would be relooking at the lines, and they'll be taking those areas out.
Okay, but the lower side, not necessarily.
The upper side, the steep slopes is at one point the regulations were that they would take that out right away, but that's a little bit of a gray area with steep slopes. But historically they've been taking them out, but they have cut back a little bit on how aggressive they are with taking those slopes out. We have some areas that they're extremely steep, and so that would certainly justify some of the areas with I don't believe they would be questioned. But steep slopes generally are considered more than 15%, and a 15% slope is not it's steep, but it's not to the point where it's really when you get to above 20-25% is then you can really appreciate a steep slope and the difficulty of building on it. It's difficult to get a septic system on it. There's a lot more building constraints as you get steeper.
Mm-hmm.
Can you characterize what the overall grade is for the other side of river? So if 10, I'm sorry, you said maybe 10 or 15% is the threshold.
Correct.
what are we
They-
looking at in
I
terms
would,
of current
I would,
topology?
well, the slopes from the roadway where the homes are, that's a modest slope. You're probably in the 15% range until you get to, and then once you're behind the homes, after a short distance, then it's very steep. You have to be a billy goat to walk on the slopes, it's so steep. You know, those, in those areas, they're just impossible to build on, they're so steep. It's like 25% plus.
Okay.
I mean, just by way of background, this topic came up during the third round of affordable housing, because the town at the time was looking at some large-scale development on River Road, and residents had come out and were very concerned, you know, and there was some discussion in order to be able to facilitate that, to put in sewer service, and there was, you know, residents were just very concerned about large-scale development, and they just did not want to see large-scale development. Now, the flip side, of course, is large, if you don't have larger scale development, then of course it kind of mitigates your potential in terms of your, what you're able to make on your home. So, although large scale development would also limit that potential. So, I think there is benefit to making sure, of course, we have residents' input, but that really was what, you know, precipitated this whole thing. Plus, we had the environmentalists came in and we're talking about, you know, corridors for passage of, you know, animals in the area, and the wetlands and the steep, I mean, it was just, it's, as John said, it's an environmentally sensitive area. So this didn't just come out of, you know, our brain trust, it was the residents coming in pretty much in force who had a lot of concerns about large-scale development in the area.
So the question for the committee is, what direction would you like us to go? Obviously, a decision is needed on whether you want to pull it out or not. It sounds like, I think, the decision is whether maybe we want to engage in some public outreach, if this is a topic that you want to pursue, if this is something that you want to explore a little bit further. John's outlined what that looks like. We could start off by, you know, writing letters directly to the residents that would be affected first to see what their feedback would be, or we could just hold a public forum that would be open to everybody as well, or we could take it in stages, or you could decide that right now is not the time to even, you know, go further on this. And tonight's not that we can also just carry this to another meeting, but there's.
Yeah, and also I just say that, you know, eliminating it from the sewer service area not going to, at least in my experience, is not going to prohibit a developer if he sees a large lot there that he may want to pursue, and then try to amend the sewer service area in the future to put it back in. You know, that I've seen that done on multiple projects, particularly in Township of Denville, two properties that were outside the sewer service area. They include wetlands, they had steep slopes, and the developers, you know, petitioned the town. It was affordable housing, and they got it approved. And then so they got the area back in the sewer service area. So it's something that these properties really, the steep slopes, the wetlands, they really shouldn't be in the wetland. They shouldn't be in the sewer service area. They're eventually going to be taken out anyway if we don't do anything. But I just don't want to have to, you know, I don't want to misrepresent to the committee that, you know, this is going to stop development in this area from someone that's going to be an intervener. You know, it's going to stop the normal, you know, development in this area of conventional that might happen with the subdivision or something. It's going to limit appropriately limit the development in this area. But if an intervener wants to make something happen, he's going to push it through.
Well, as far as some guidance, I think it would be, worthwhile to provide some sort of information to those potentially impacted, whether it's, as you suggested, letters. But I think it's posted, specking out the details this evening, but I would like to suggest that we do some sort of, put some system in place to obtain input from those who would be potentially impacted. Whether it's putting information out on the website, reaching out directly through letters, or, you know.
I think the best thing might be, though, to invite them, maybe we do a Zoom or an info session with John to explain to them, you know, more personally what that would mean for their property. And solicit their input on that. You know, that way we can take account and say if there are, 10 properties, 5 are okay with this, 5 are not okay with this, 9 out of 10 definitely want this, or don't, but at least just to give us some indication of those who are directly impacted, and then we can decide how to expand the public communication on that. If
Yes.
that's fine, unless you want to do a different.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful because this area, because of the grades, it would be difficult to get these properties with gravity. So people thinking, oh, I'm gonna get a sewer, they're gonna ultimately have a grinder pump if they're going to get sewers in this area. This is gonna be a low pressure sewer line. Basically, it's a small diameter pipe and you just have multiple grinder pumps connected to it. So if they, even if they wanna get sewer, they can be educated that this is technically what's really feasible in that area. It's for the number of homes, it's just not practical to install a gravity line and install a new pump station and go through that route. That'd be extremely expensive. And we can explain to the residents also, if there's an interest in extending sewers, that we can explain the whole special assessment process, that how we extended sewers in other areas in the town, because it's not the sewer utility or the township does not pay for sewers. It's the residents that are receiving that infrastructure, that benefit pays for the infrastructure to be installed. So.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful for them to understand the pros and the cons.
Yeah, and we have some readily available maps so that we can just show, okay, these are the wetland areas in this area, these are the floodplains, these are the steep slopes, and we can regulate that. And those are all maps, because, you know, those maps were generated, we just need to blow them up for this area. So we can readily put some information together for residents to do that.
I just think having almost like a one-on-one with John for them, it would be a group-on-one, but that way, because it's a very complicated issue with, it's gonna open up a lot of questions, and I think trying to put that all in a letter would be hard, and then just raise more concerns. So it might just be best to say, hey, we're having a public info session for your neighborhood with John to talk about the benefits, the pros and the cons, and exploring the sewer service area.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. All right. The other one is concerning minor site plans. John, do you want me to tee that up? Or
Yeah.
do you want so this really came about because, I mean, I've only been here a few years and I haven't heard of this coming up too often, but a developer in town, that Cornerstone, that finished building the property over there, they want to put a marquee sign of it, Cornerstone. Apparently that was overlooked in the approvals. And so in order to come back, you know, that's something that would require them to make a whole new visit to the planning board. And there's no provision in our ordinances for minor site plans, correct, John?
Correct.
And so they would be going through a major site plan just to make what minor improvement on their property. And so I brought that up to John just to pick his brain, because he's been here a long time and has done a lot of work with the land use boards. And that's when John told me, well, that mechanism doesn't exist. How often does it happen? Not too often, but often enough that
but it is
might be
common
something to consider. So
it is common in other municipalities. There's provisions for not require, you know, having a better definition of what requires site plan approval. So if you're not impacting traffic, you're not impacting drainage, you're not impacting X, Y, and Z, you know, and you're proposing something that fully complies with all the zoning requirements, you can make a minor change. So we really don't have that in the ordinance to accommodate that. And it just seems like it is something that's more of an industry standard of having something that limits some minor improvements without having to make a commercial property owner come in for minor things.
So what's triggering this is because it's over 1 acre, right there.
No, it's not. No, it's any any improvements on a commercial property has to come to the board.
Would be deemed.
Yeah.
so that's why it
Any
can be
improvements.
burdensome. How often do we have that here?
Yeah, for example, Arbor Green had to come back to the board simply because they changed their light from internal illumination to external, and so it was just something as minor as that. And actually Hickory Square has come in for minor things like that, just minor signage. And that's really what triggers a lot, is just some minor signage. So if they're putting a new sign in that fully conforms with all the setbacks, with the size of the sign, how the sign is supposed to be constructed, you know, it seems like that would be something that the zoning officer should be able to sign off on for something minor.
So the question is, if you do want to, I mean, that is a process that requires both the governing body and the planning board. So the question is whether you want to make a formal referral and recommendation to the planning board to take that up, or it can initiate with us here and then go to them. Or is it something you don't want to address and just kind of leave it as is?
Is there a downside to having it, or just?
No, I don't think, it does get cumbersome to send something, it's a cost too to the commercial properties.
Right.
They have to go through, they're hiring their attorney, they're going, it costs them thousands of dollars for something. Set plans, and sometimes it costs more to come to the board than the actual improvement that they're doing, so it's.
And then the
kind of-
delays as well. Like,
Yeah,
sometimes.
so I
they
think
get
it's
on the
just
agenda.
to accommodate the property owners, to have some minor, that, again, it's something that fully conforms with all parts of the code, it's just something minor improvement that they're making. So, my suggestion is we kick this to the planning board, we'll let them come up with some language, and then they can come back to the committee to review what their recommendation is. Then you would go through the process of introduction and discussion.
It's clearly defined a major versus minor, so that
Correct,
there's not
correct.
a lot of
Yes.
argument and back
Exactly.
and forth.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
It's very common in
It's,
other
yeah, I was
municipalities.
gonna say,
Right.
it's pretty
Okay.
common.
Yeah.
So you'll have an example.
Yeah.
You will have
Oh,
an
yeah,
example of the
absolutely.
draft ordinance.
Yeah.
And it's basically an amendment to the ordinance that introduces some minor adjustment, minor site plan, something like that.
Definition.
Probably should be definitions, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
define
there'll be
creating it
definitions to
and-
do it, and some towns actually have a subcommittee of the planning board to review something, and so we can have other layers, and they'll vent that out to the planning board of how they would like it, some, even though with these, I know some planning boards, they wanna see every little thing, they wanna know exactly what that sign's gonna look like, they wanna, those things, and, but, I think we can come up with something reasonable and practical.
Well,
Are
I
you
think the
interested-
planning board would like to know that,
Yeah, yeah.
they just don't need the entire site plan work.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
they
And,
don't
and
need
so
that.
like I
They
said,
would like
sometimes
to spec, sure.
you can have a subcommittee that's just reviewing a zoning application, and it's just a subcommittee of 3, they get together, and not a public hearing, they just get together, and they just talk about it and says, yeah, this is something that we
Like
can
a
waive.
technical review committee.
Yeah, like a technical review committee, because that's another process that's there, and it just kind of gives a little bit more, another set of eyes, instead of just the zoning officer looking at something, you have a small committee looking at it, and so it's not going through the whole board and not paying the whole process.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable, it doesn't happen very often, but it certainly is a commonplace pathway that's offered by many municipalities, so.
So, just so I understand, are you, looking for the planning board to make a recommendation to you, or is that what?
Yeah, that's what we've done in the past.
Okay, that's,
Yeah,
I just
yeah, we
didn't know
let
how
the
you
board- the
had
board
handled
would-
it in the past,
Yeah,
okay.
But we've
board-
done a letter, I guess, from either you or the attorney,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I
saying
can-
the township committee wants you to
Correct.
take a look at this.
Okay.
Kind of deal formally, we did that with the setbacks, I
Right.
think,
Yeah,
a year or two
I'll
ago.
talk to the chairman, we put it on the agenda discussion item, and then, they may encourage Frank to pull something together and do a memo, and so it'll take a process. and-
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
sure before I start drawing.
Yeah, yeah, yep, no.
Okay, with John here, were there any questions on his report? Nope. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you,
Good
Mr.
night, everyone.
Ashby.
Mayor, would you like me to start at the top then?
Yes, please.
Okay, so under administration, we've got 4 pieces of legislation coming up over the next month or 2. The first one is the circular ordinance. We had some discussions on this last year, but by the time we got to a point where there was, I think, a consensus, it was too late in the year to introduce an ordinance, and so we're taking this back up. It originated at the Environmental Commission, and our liaison, Community MQ, brought that to our attention. There is a draft that should reflect the feelings and sentiments from the last meeting on this topic. I believe it captured everyone's input on that, and that should be the consensus draft, unless there's any further changes. If that's good, then we can have that ready for introduction at the next meeting.
Did we, I know I had asked about having the chair of the environmental commission come and speak on this, but did we at least send this over so they could take a look?
We can do that after this meeting. I did not get a chance to. But I can certainly send that to them.
I mean, I think we
now.
covered a lot of the things that there was some back and forth, and I think they would have liked to have participated in the discussion, but, yeah, I think we address a lot of the concerns. Certainly, we have the opt-out component, which is not available right now. Meaning opt-out of having, the flyers placed on our driveways, and then, in terms of where the placement is, so I think those are the two key things.
I also think as we work to reflect that, it would be for commercial and
Correct.
for profit, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it'd be boundaried off along those lines.
What I've seen also in some other towns, in part of the implementation of this, is they'll have on their website, just sort of like we've got a do not knock registry, but they put information on their website about who to contact. So they have the phone number and the email address. I found that on some websites. So they say, hey, if you'd like to opt out of this, if you don't want the circulars anymore, call this number or email this number and let them know. So it helps, publicize that this is an option. So if we do adopt this ordinance, we can certainly do that too.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? Mr. Shoddy?
Okay, thank you. So the next two items, I'm looking to have hopefully for the next meeting, expecting that probably the end of this week or early next week, I'll have offer letters to a new technical assistant and an administrative assistant. The administrative assistant would be to replace the individual that resigned from the admin, finance, HR position. I think we've narrowed it down to 2 candidates for both, and we'll be moving ahead with those. I'll let the admin committee know about that either Friday or Monday. And then the authorization for Colony Pool concession bidding is coming up. It's that time. It seems like we blink and it's here. The concession bid is limited in duration. Last time we did this, I believe, was 2023. And for the 23 and 24 season, so for the 2025 season, we need to do this again. It would be for 25 and 26. So with your approval by way of resolution to authorize that bidding, we would publish those bid specs and hopefully at either the April, but no later than the May meeting, award that contract. Any questions on those? Okay. Next item, before we get to the point of drafting the ordinance, there is a memo concerning the land use board fees. I did talk briefly at the last workshop meeting that we're exploring correcting, adjusting, and making some adjustments to the fees for 4 different areas. One is our land use boards, the other one is for the fire prevention office, the other one is for the construction and zoning offices. Those are some fees that are either not in line with our current costs or with what the state statute allows for. So I asked the different department heads to prepare a memo along with comparisons and a recommendation, and that's what you've got here today is just that one for the land use board fees. Coming up at the next month would be the others. And so with your feedback on this, we would either prepare an ordinance for introduction to address the concerns by our land use board manager.
And Mr. Shahadi, these increases would be, again, as a result of a reflection of the cost to do the notices.
Correct.
And part of the work encompasses reviewing fees of comparable municipalities.
Correct.
So that the increase, while it is increased, nevertheless is deemed reasonable and within line with other municipalities.
Correct. We have to advertise for decisions. There's a whole bunch of things that we have to by law advertise, and costs to advertise in the papers go up, and we either taxpayers eat those costs. What we're trying to do is make sure that the individuals that are making these application fees are paying the fees appropriate to cover our costs, so it doesn't get passed on to taxpayers. And that one specifically with this is subsection 30-17.1 in our land use ordinances to adjust, 17.1 and 17.2 to $100 in order to cover the cost of our advertising for notice of decisions. So if you look, included was the Borough of New Providence and the Borough of Chatham's prices, and this would not be unreasonable.
Yeah, I was a little confused. So I get the $100 on the advertising, but the rest of the fees were in there, but I just would see notes that say amended site plan, but it didn't say what if there was a recommended change in the fee.
Yeah, so this would be, the notes were just copies from the actual hard copy. Those notes aren't relevant to this, the actual handwritten notes on that. So if you go to, I'll pull that up for you.
Yeah, I see down below it's highlighted. But it, wouldn't say, for example, if somebody says 300, it wouldn't say recommending 350 or something. It just, the one I'm looking at doesn't have any.
Are you looking at the file that is just so I'm looking at the same one as you? You're referring to the Chatham Township ordinances?
Yes.
Okay.
Chatham Township 30-17 fees.
Yes, so let me, yeah, those highlights and all, those are her personal notes on some other things, because this is the bound book, so she makes copies in her book, so those aren't related to this request.
Okay, maybe it's just me. If somebody could just jot me a note at some point, tell me
Yes.
exactly what we're looking to change and what those amounts are, because it just wasn't clear to me.
Yep.
Thank you. I thought we were gonna flesh it out here a little bit more, but that's what I'm trying to understand exactly what's changing.
It is, so if you go to, it's the cost of publication. It's not all the other notes, so it's where the part where it talks about cost of publication.
Yeah, is that it?
That's all.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not
I thought
all
you
the
said there were
others.
4 things that were changing.
Those are coming in the future. This is just for the land use board. The other one, the other department heads are gonna have their own memos coming later on. This was just one of the 4 reviews of fees that we have.
Okay,
So this is just that one portion today we're talking about.
okay,
Sorry about the confusion on that.
okay.
Yeah, this is just on the land use board, notice of decision fees. That's all.
Okay.
Yep.
That was a lot of information for just that.
I know, she did include a lot of info. But that's, those will have their own memos with their own supporting documentation.
Great, thank you.
So, can we go ahead with drafting that ordinance for introduction?
Yes, I'm fine with it. So, again, so for its planning and zoning board
That's it,
adjustment.
yep,
yes.
just that for now. Okay. Thank you. Moving on, under clerk, we have the business and landlord insurance registration ordinance. That one, you've got a sample, a draft of what that ordinance would look like. It's largely modeled off of state language, and our township attorney could speak about that a little bit more if you have any questions, but that is based off of state statute. There was an amendment to law that requires businesses and landlords to have liability insurance and register with the municipality to demonstrate proof that they have that. And we don't have an ordinance to provide for that mechanism where they register and to charge them for that registration. And we're looking to amend our ordinance to include that now, so we are complying with the state law.
And so just to be clear, this is presumably all these entities that would fall under this would already have liability insurance. And
You would hope.
it's not that we are requiring them to go procure it, right? It is just registering with essentially a certificate of insurance attesting.
The only thing that the ordinance does, so everything in the ordinance is required by statute. We're not imposing anything new other than 2 things. One is a fee, which I think
25.
I put $25, which seems to be what other people were doing, and a potential fine if they don't comply. So that's the only thing we add. Everything else, they're statutorily required to do. So we're not adding anything else that they are not otherwise required. So everything else is statutory. They have all those amounts, none of that's us. All of that's the state. All the insurance, all that other stuff, they're required to do it anyway.
But they were never required to actually register with us so that we are
That is
performing like the second line of defense to make sure that they're complying?
As of the statute, that also says you have to register with us. So
Oh,
this
okay.
ordinance doesn't impose that either. That's
Oh.
also part of it, the
Okay.
statute. So it actually says that they have to register with us as well. So the ordinance, literally the only thing it's telling them only thing new it's doing is that $25, because the statute says that municipalities can adopt an ordinance imposing the fee, because, to account for the time that now we're gonna be spending to register them and the bookkeeping time that it's gonna take.
Right.
We can impose the fee and we can impose the fine for non-compliance. That's the only things, and the statute actually says we can do those two things, so that's the only two things that
Does
it
this
does.
apply to businesses of all shapes and sizes? I mean,
Mhm.
like every single
Mhm.
home business across the board and everything too? And then there's no notification process prior to, it's just if you violate, you're subjected to a fine? There's no opportunity at all for us to offer any sort of notification?
You have two small business owners in town
Yeah,
here.
asking for a friend.
No.
Yeah, I think that's, certainly subject to, I would, if someone were to ask me, I'd say, listen, you gotta give them an opportunity to comply. I think that's typical. You give them an opportunity to comply,
But there's a lot of things though that are ordinance that people may not, just like state law, right? Like you may not have even been aware of the state law. The state didn't notify. We don't, in fact, the state's probably in a better position to notify businesses because you have to register with the state. You don't have to register with the town that you're a business.
Right.
There's probably a ton of businesses in town that we don't know about. So we would kind of put blanket notifications. We try to let people, I can't directly notify every business if I don't know they exist.
Right.
So typically, things happen where you are not in compliance with the law, somebody finds out, and then you've got to come into compliance with the law.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of things unfortunately tend to work. We will do our effort to notify them, and that's why, there's discretion with the judge also. The judge is not always gonna hammer you with the maximum or say, okay, well, take care of it. But the big concern is that if, God forbid, something were to happen, that's your real punishment, is that you didn't have insurance, and you're gonna be dealing with civil repercussions in that case.
Right.
And I think from the township's perspective, it's that we're holding up what we're obligated to do, right? We're doing what we're supposed to be doing under the statute. We're monitoring it, and we're taking the registration, aspect of it seriously. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're implementing it, and it's an important, policy to implement, and we're doing it to the best of our ability. Is it gonna catch everybody? No, of course it's not. But nothing does, right? I mean,
Right.
it's,
Well, how would you, so in terms of administration and practice, how do you, so we pass this ordinance, and then what are our next steps in terms of,
So
you can start with like
practically,
fire alarm registry. There are
Yeah.
ways to go find businesses. I think it's very difficult to find rented units and four-family with owner occupied.
so I think it's actually easier to find the multifamily properties than
Well,
in
by
rental
code, yeah,
properties
yeah,
than it
yeah.
is the commercial properties, because you're either gonna be, the one that's sort of trickier would be the rental properties. Because let's say you're an Airbnb,
That's a
right?
private transaction.
We don't know. Now, granted, we've been talking about this for lead inspection purposes as well, because we have to do those. There are people that are renting their home through a realtor. Realtors would say to their, to the property owner, say, hey, under state law, you've got to do this. But if you're doing it through Airbnb, VRBO, we're not really gonna know, unless somebody alerts us to that. The multifamily properties, those would be classified on our tax records. We would have an easier way of knowing those. On the commercial properties, if it is a commercial property, you're gonna be maybe a 4C commercial property on our tax rolls. But if you've got a business, but not a commercial property,
right.
then we wouldn't necessarily know that. We could go through the Department of State and maybe try and get a registry that way. How would we practically implement it? We would get, through SDL, for example, which is the software that we use in the construction office. We're using that now for dog and cat licensing. They have different modules, so part of that cost that Tina's talking about, the $25, part of that cost would go to now paying our cost to have that system in order to maintain that database.
So I've got a
That was my
question. So with the commercial property section, theoretically, there could be somebody that runs a business from their home, but they're not receiving customers, they're just, doing business from a spare room in their house. Would that fall under this?
Yeah, it's a commercial business, yeah.
Okay,
I think you should have insurance either way, I mean, depending on what you're doing.
Sure.
Yeah, 'cause I'm just thinking,
I have
like,
insurance.
a home,
I have to
a
register.
home-based business where you're not receiving customers, you would already have your homeowner's insurance and stuff like that, but,
Most tend to, or they've talked to their insurance professional and they've taken on additional insurance because it happens to be a business.
well, I don't work in insurance, so I don't know, but.
No, nor do I, but as a small business owner, it was recommended for me to take on more insurance because somebody comes to my house and I talk business with them, something happens, it's a business issue. So it's not unlikely that residents that are operating businesses out of their home don't already have sufficient insurance to cover the qualifications here. What they might not be aware of is that they have to register
Right,
with
right.
us. So, it could be both, but it's probably unlikely. I can't speak for everyone.
So that's what I was trying to understand, what it's, the $25 is paying for, because,
It would pay for the administrative time of whether the clerk has to send out notices, violations, but also the system that we would be maintaining to keep track of this.
No difference than a,
and that's
Yeah.
they have to pay an annual fee to file that insurance?
Register, yeah, register.
Is presumably, at least at the outset, I would have to spend a lot of time sending notice to all the businesses to let them know that they have to do an initial plus an annual filing with me, so that's gonna be my time, the cost of postage, sending out the notice, the cost of paper, sending out the form and such.
if you're
'Cause,
proactive about it,
Yeah.
that's,
Well, how are they supposed to know unless I send out a notice?
well, I think that's another question if you are being proactive about it. It's just a state, it's been in place since 2022. Telling you now, this is the first I'm hearing of it. So,
And nobody has registered with us, as
Right.
Ms. Coney said. They've been required to register with us, whether we had the ordinance or not, didn't mean they didn't have to do that. We haven't gotten any registrations,
Right.
so.
I mean, I only learned about this required myself a month or two ago.
So I'm reading also
right,
multifamily.
but nobody is arguing, or I guess nobody is suggesting that there's a proactive measure to get an active list from the state and send notification out.
We could try to do that, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's a discussion point or
Is-
if it's something we want to pursue.
Insofar as we have any sort of a list, I have a database of all the retail food businesses in town, so at
Retail,
least I can
sure.
start from there, but,
Sure, retail's pretty easy
Yeah.
to identify. It's the small businesses or, operating out of their homes.
Yeah, we would contact the state, if we want to be proactive about this. We would contact the state and try to get a list so we can send out notification. There's also commercial databases out there too.
Sure.
There's a lot,
Yeah,
lot
no,
of
there's-
commercial resources, so, is the feeling that we do want to be proactive or not proactive about it?
I'm gonna recuse myself from that. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
you
we
know,
just,
I mean-
we're proactively told you right now.
No, well, and I have an obligation now for obvious reasons,
Yes.
but I can't sit here and say that, 6 months ago, this is something I would want. I'm operating a business out of my home. So do you really want to subject that to everybody, or is it's state law already? I'm gonna recuse myself from, voting on
Yeah.
that kind of topic.
Can I suggest, I mean, apparently we're 3 years behind already. Can we kind of digest this one? Because this is news for me. I'm looking at, for multifamily, it sounds like for each unit, it's at $25 for the filing, right? That's what it seems, that's, if I'm reading it correctly.
You can
No,
change
no.
that. It could be whatever you want. That's just what
Yeah.
others have done.
So that, your water bottle's lighting up.
That means I need to take a drink.
Okay, so there's no rush, right? We could kinda,
No, I mean, we briefly talked about it at the last meeting. Now we've slow walked it to a draft for you to review before we actually put it on the agenda to introduce. We could introduce it in February, March, whatever you want. That's what we're here to decide.
Well, based on the comments I've heard thus far, I think this is something that probably requires further consideration.
Yeah,
In
but just
terms
to-
of practicality, right, the back end side of things where, is it gonna be a database that's living that compiles all this information? And then sort of the enforcement side of things, right? Do we, how wide do we cast the net in terms of bona fide standalone businesses, these owner occupied for families and rental units, as well as work from home or home office?
Well,
type?
those aren't really, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Goodman, that's not necessarily something to decide on. It's the fee to decide. Everything else besides the fee is
We
set by
can't
state
change any of
statute.
that.
So all you're really deciding is the fee. That's it.
The fee and the fine.
And whether or
And the
not to,
fine.
and
No,
apply
they
this.
enforce it, no, again, enforcement is if something happens, we're alerted, the question is whether administratively we are proactive in sending out a notice to say, hey, FYI, there's this law since 2022, you
Right.
need to do that, but that's not even a part of this ordinance. The decisions are the fees and the fines, and when you want to introduce it, right?
Correct.
The onus is on the business owner and the landlord. The onus is not on us to make sure that they file. Maybe it would be,
Correct. The
It would-
statute doesn't
right.
require us to make sure that businesses are registering with us.
right, we can let them know, by the way.
We
if it
can,
comes up.
and you can decide whether or not you want us to
Right.
affirmatively contact everyone, businesses in the municipality. That is another thing you can decide. But as far as the ordinance is concerned, and that's not in the ordinance, because that's more administrative and policy. In the ordinance, it's the fee and the fine.
It's not even how many units.
No.
That's what I mean, like, it's
No,
not
that's
even
all
how
in the
many units
statute.
are affected or not affected.
No.
These
Well, yeah,
are-
they're defined entities in here, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Categorized.
Yeah, I think that I heard what you said about you will wink, wink, nudge, nudge to help them comply with everything, but the ordinance as it's written now is that it's no less than $500 for a violation. And I think we should ask a little bit more leniency in the violation of.
Yep, we can absolutely do, that's something that you can modify that to 0 if you want.
It's not so much that it's 0, because I think at some point you're gonna have to, you've done your best to get them to compliance. I just wouldn't wanna see a back fee imposed on anyone just because you didn't offer them, and I'm sure you would, I just don't know who
Yeah.
in the future will be in your position, if they will be as kind to give them that opportunity. So I think. I'd
Well,
like
that's
to
not even within that would go to the judge also.
Whomever,
Yeah,
whomever,
that
I'm
goes
just
to
saying,
the judge.
I think we can, or township residents who have a business in the township, we should offer some sort of opportunity for them to reach
Comply.
compliance prior to the fee imposed. That's all I'm asking.
Prior to the fine.
The fine,
Fine,
sorry,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
the fee I can understand.
Do we have an appreciation for the uptake amongst municipalities on putting into effect ordinances with regard to this law? I mean, I recall the language saying a municipality may pass an ordinance.
Yeah, I think I saw at least 3 of them. I don't know about, are you talking about like enforcing and if they're like reaching out?
Or are you
No, I'm
adopting
talking
an
about
ordinance?
putting into effect an ordinance.
I can take a look and see how many ordinances I see, just in the ones I know. But that doesn't
Let me get
necessarily
back to you
mean
on-
that they could still be getting registrations without an ordinance. They're just not imposing a fine and imposing a fee.
Yes, I appreciate that, okay. So then I think, unless anyone objects, this would appear to require further consideration, further dialogue on this.
Yeah.
And I think the second portion of it is how proactive are you going to be on small businesses in the township to collect the fee? Is a secondary question.
I have
With regard to the violations and penalties, a possible amendment would be on the first offense, I've seen in
Yes.
other areas, language like, first offense, there shall be no fine type of a deal.
Mhm.
And then you
As long
have-
as compliance within a certain
Correct.
number of
Yeah, I
days
think
or
that's
something
correct.
like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I have an upcoming Clerks Association meeting. I can find out from the other clerks how many towns are proactively doing something, and
Yeah, that'd be great too. I think that the
That would be
only issue with, as you're making that amendment, is if you're proactively sending notifications out, does that mean that they are in violation if it's found out later, right? Which I think is the answer is yes, because you properly notified them, right?
Well, either way, they're in violation.
Correct.
So
But you said, if you're
once
saying
it's,
first offense, and if you're proactive, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but should you send out a proactive notification to them and they still don't comply, then that would be technically the second offense, which case,
no, you've gotta get a violation. So you're gonna get a violation.
okay.
Either way, you're gonna have to, be found to have violated.
Okay.
Like, you're not gonna get, setting out the notification doesn't count as a first
Okay.
offense. You gotta be
Alright.
found to violate it
Okay.
first. So that, no, that wouldn't be a second offense.
That's good.
Any other
Sorry,
questions?
just to mention, what's the benefit of these entities filing with this
Compliance with the law,
township?
with this.
Well, aside from compliance, is there any,
it's just so we know that they're
Benefit?
compliant.
What it is the state not wanting to take on responsibility and making
Yeah.
sure there's compliance with the statute and passing it on to the municipalities to keep track of it.
okay.
So that's why they have to register with the municipalities, but the state wanting to make sure that businesses have the proper insurance.
I mean, the benefit, and it's a soft benefit to the township, is knowing that they exist and who they are, and having a database.
Right.
Should you wanna contact them for other purposes,
Mhm.
other reasons, we have that right now. We were just talking about, some towns will have a requirement to register a business with a municipality as well. We don't have that
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Some towns do that. It's like $5,
Mhm.
$10, you have that. So that way, if you wanna send out a notification on anything that might affect businesses, you can do that. We've got
Yeah.
bits and pieces, you can compile sort of lists like that, right? It's not gonna be complete, but you could look at commercial properties that are registered and designated as such through the tax assessor's office. You could look at the landlords that register for, under the landlord tenant registration law. You could look under the fire marshal's office and look at who's being done, who's getting life hazard and non-life hazard inspections. So in different ways, there's registrations for different purposes, and you could cobble together one master list, but it's not comprehensive like the private practitioner running a business out of their own home.
But just to be clear, whether or not we adopt the ordinance, they're still required to register with us.
Yeah, no, the part that I didn't understand is, I thought they were also having to register with the state, so in terms of ensuring compliance, I thought the state was taking care of that, but you're saying that's gotten downloaded to the municipalities.
That's what the state tends to do, though. I mean, they did
Yeah.
that with the lead inspection law, right? Very easy for the state they're making every town now look at either hiring their own employee or hiring a vendor or outsourcing it, when they could have just said, we already have the Bureau of Housing, let's have the state's Bureau of Housing do this. Or, there's a lot of things that the state just passes down to municipalities and makes us eat the cost and the process of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on the report from the clerk? Moving on, construction and building department, we got the report there. Any questions? Under finance, over the next month or two, we've got the cap bank ordinance that we'd like to introduce and adopt. That one comes up every year. If we do move ahead with it, it's just something that has to sequentially be done before the adoption of the municipal budget. We are looking at introducing the municipal budget at the March 25th meeting. We are hoping to have a presentation to the public at the March 11th workshop meeting. So we can introduce the cap bank ordinance either at the February 25th meeting or at the March 25th meeting. If it's at the March 25th meeting, just has to be higher up on the agenda than the budget. The cap bank ordinance is one of those things that is a matter of procedure to make sure that anything from the cap bank, well, it does two things. One is says, are we banking anything, and also increases what that cap is. It can be done together or separated out. It's been done in previous years. It does not mean taxes are going up. It does not raise taxes. That's not what any of that does. But the ordinance is largely templated from the state, and we just fill in the blanks. Any questions or concerns on that? No. Thoughts on as to when you'd like it introduced? Can we move ahead with that at the next meeting? Or would you like that at the March meeting?
I'm fine at the next meeting.
Next meeting.
Might as well get it done
Okay.
on February 25th.
Okay, thank you.
And I think just to fill out the context, so this is already, this is an ordinance, this is already done the prior year.
Correct.
And so we're just continuing that practice
Yep.
into this coming year.
It's been done, in my understanding, nearly every year, except for maybe I think one or two in the last 5 years where it was misrepresented and misconstrued and politicized, but it really is, you know, none of the misrepresentations were accurate about it. It is something that most municipalities do. It is just a tool in your toolbox, and a tool in the toolbox for this and future governing bodies. Public work, police, any questions on the report there? Public
No.
Works, we received.
Oh, sorry, I have a
sure.
question on the
Yes.
police. Just so I'm a little clear, because there was some back and forth on the funding for the
The
fiber optic
Yep.
loop. So we never received the funds. We had gotten a federal grant. We never received the funds. It's 850,000 about. And then there was some concern that we didn't have the funds, but now we think we have the funds. My concern is, what are the drivers, only because we're gonna spend the money, and then are we gonna get the money back?
Sure, so I'll offer a little more clarification on that. So we were awarded the grant, we didn't ever actually get the money. With a lot of the federal funds, they're drawdown, so you submit drawdown requests periodically through a system, and part of that also includes reporting. So we made an award to a contractor in November or December, and they did start work, but nothing tangible in terms of actual construction. We're still in the administrative and procedural process. We have to go through Verizon to implement a lease agreement, which you've authorized. There's a lot of drawings and specs that still have to get approved, engineering that has to go through Verizon for us to be able to use the poles. We made that award, and then in January, towards the end of the month, we got a notification from the federal government that the last chance to draw down any funds was January 28th or 29th. Essentially said, if you've got any drawdowns that you want to make, this is your last chance to do them, which essentially meant that it was frozen until further direction. So part of the contract that we awarded to the vendor had a clause that we could suspend the contract, and so we did put them immediately on notice to say, hey, here's what the federal government said, you're on notice, the project is suspended because we don't know what's going to happen. We didn't really draw down anything yet. We didn't have any expenses at that point to worry about drawdown, and then shortly thereafter it was, quote, unfrozen, and we were told we could go ahead. And so the project is proceeding as normal, but the risk that it could be frozen at any time, or we don't know. We can't predict what could happen under this administration over the course of this project. So that's where we're at. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, this is nothing
Yeah.
we can do about it, is the punchline.
The only thing we can do about it is decide that we don't want to proceed with the
Right.
project. It's too much of a risk, and we don't want to proceed with the project, and to cancel the contract.
Help me understand the risks. So we haven't yet put in our contribution to it. And so it's unfrozen in theory, and the project will move forward. Based on it progressing forward and us being able to draw down the funds and the township putting up its own money. So there's a risk there that we end up spending money and not having a completed project.
Correct.
Is there anything we can do as far as accelerating the drawdown and using
No, the drawdown is gonna be
Based
based on
on
actual
exact-
costs and the reports. So,
Invoices.
you know, let's say we order fiber and Verizon has fees that they've charged us, and, you know, those would go into the next reporting period and into the next drawdown cycle. So we would just draw them down as quickly as we possibly can as soon as we have expenses, but that's it. But at some point, let's say you order all the fiber, you order the fiber, and then the project is frozen, whatever happens with the feds, we'd be stuck with all this fiber, and we would have to decide, do we want to bond for the project, do we wanna undertake it ourselves, or do we wanna cancel and maybe auction the fiber and
Keep our receipts.
keep our receipts?
Return it.
Exactly, return it. We don't know.
What is the length of the
Amazon return?
project? How
Time
long?
length?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, I do have a
6
project
months,
schedule.
something like that.
Longer. I can get you that time frame. I don't wanna misspeak on that.
It's $800-some-odd project. What is
It's
our?
more than that, it's a little bit more than that.
But this tranche is, right, so,
Yeah,
what's our theoretical contribution as this project progresses? Do you recall?
are you talking about in terms of like,
The township's
matching
portion,
our,
yes,
our
yeah.
allocation? A large part of that has already been, made, because
Okay.
part of the grant proposal included cameras and other security equipment that were part of this project. So, our argument and our, essentially our report is that we've already undertaken those. We didn't wait, but they were all part of the scope of the grant.
Okay,
So, for the most part, our contribution has already been made.
so really it's just a process of work actually taking place and then drawing down federal funds to reflect the portion of the work that's been completed.
Correct.
Okay, so
If
we're
Elon says,
playing with house money going forward, okay.
Right.
All right, I just wanted to understand the risks there on our side.
So when we do the
Yeah.
budget, if we can have some kind of sense of what the impact would be for having to take on that additional $850,000 in debt.
Tell you right now what the impact would be of another $850,000. I'm just saying, a couple of my clients get federal funds, and we did not get funds that were already appropriated previous years. They said, no, I'm sorry, you don't get it. Even with the frozen, unfrozen, like, it's been a scramble for the past couple of weeks trying to get funding. This is a nonprofit.
now this is this gets into the debate where I've already talked to some folks at different levels of the federal government where they say this isn't necessarily agency or departmental discretionary funding. In other words, this isn't like a grant that, like Safe Routes to Schools, for example, right? We make that application, Safe Routes to Schools, that's through the state, but the state is getting federal pass-through funds, and that's from the DOT. That's different than this, because this is actually congressionally directed spending. Now, the argument about how much weight Congress has and the argument between what the executive and the legislative do here, but these are funds that were specifically earmarked, appropriated, and authorized by Congress specifically for these purposes, as opposed to the Department of Transportation saying, here's within our budget, $10 billion for infrastructure, and they're gonna dole it out as they want. Each one of these specific projects was approved by Congress. So there is the feeling that these can't be withheld or held up in the same way that other federal funds could.
But now you're just telling me our Safe Routes to School money can?
Yes, and those are, granted, we still have not been able to proceed with those.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, we've got three grants going back to 2014.
And the township contribution is material on the,
Yeah, so, those are slightly different than this. Those could be frozen. At least the argument could be made that those could be frozen, but this can't. But who knows, all of this will end up in the judiciary, trying to sort out whether there is the legal authority to proceed with something like that or not.
So, sorry, this is just cascading. So every year, we do get DOT funds for our paving projects.
Those are just state, that's
Those are
only
state.
state, correct.
Okay. Any other funds at risk that we should be aware of?
I believe potential, anything that would be a federal pass-through grant, again, they've sort of all been unfrozen, you know, that's a weird word to even use for these. But the Safe Routes to Schools, which are all pass-through grants from the federal government to the state, are the only ones that I can think of. I'd have to confirm whether the Green Village Connector Trail would, because that's a TAP grant, that's a Transportation Alternatives grant, which I think is also a pass-through.
Okay. Yeah, if you can kind of let us know, because we had a whole bunch of projects planned, underway. I mean, that Safe Routes to Schools has been 12 years out now, I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy. But it would be nice to get all that implemented, and if we could figure out whether or not we think things will go through, or more likely to go through, and how much we would be in the hook, or.
Fortunately for
Because
right
we've
now.
spent money, and we're gonna keep spending money, and then if it gets cut off at some point, it's kind of.
Well, with those 4 grants, we haven't spent anything that, you know, it's would only be, it's definitely 3, the Safe Routes to Schools, 14, 16, and 18. And then the question mark is to confirm whether the TAP grant for Green Village Connector Trail would fall under that category or not. But on all 4 of those, we haven't spent monies directly related to those grant scopes that we were authorized for. You know, there's been engineering costs, but whether they were frozen or not, we were eating those costs anyways. And then with the Green Village Connector Trail, we haven't even gotten to that point yet, because we're still at the permitting stage, which would be the first part, which were county grants.
Yeah, well, a lot of the design funds were grant money, so
Correct.
we don't have a lot of money out of pocket, I don't think, for any of them.
No,
Like
exactly,
Safe
so
Routes.
none of those is there really a risk for, at this point, money that we've put out or will be putting out that could be in jeopardy.
Okay,
But certainly should we find ourselves at a juncture where, you know, there is a disbursement on our side that's forthcoming, or, yeah.
Yeah.
We obviously we'd have to revisit this and.
Yeah, and you
That's
would
the
know, because
basis.
we haven't made awards for any contracts on any of them yet, so, that would be the trigger, is when we make an award for contracts. So we haven't even gotten authorization to, actually, we went out to bid on the first one,
Right.
the 2014 Safe Routes to Schools, and every time I think we're on our 4th,
Yeah.
I think we're on the
keep
4th one, because we
rejecting.
keep getting rejected by the state, because the bidders aren't complying with the requirements. So that would be the trigger, and they're not gonna get to the other ones until that one is awarded.
Most unfortunate disruptions, but, you know, I'm sure you'll keep us apprised of any situations where it's our time to
Yeah.
cut a check, and we wanna make sure that money doesn't fall into a hole where a project doesn't get completed because we're relying on the release of funds.
Right.
Thank you.
Public Works, we received their report, and we also included the annual snow and ice report. I do think it's important for the public, if I may highlight, just so they understand the scope of, one, what their tax dollars are paying for, and what the weather has been resulting in terms of work for DPW. There's been, and this is for 2024, so ending December 31st, about 335 regular hours and 431 overtime hours in total related to snow and ice storms or incidents. It's required us to purchase and disperse 566 tons of salt and 8,406 gallons of salt brine. Those are at a cost, the combined salt and salt brine are at a cost of almost $52,000. And the, some additional plowing through contractors that we use to support is an extra $4,200.
Mr. Shoddy, how does this compare with our budget and our expectations?
We've had, you know, we've been within our budget. I'll say we have not been resulting in any emergencies that require any reflection on, you know, insufficient funds budgeted or allocated. We look at these year after year in terms of our budget planning. So what we hope to do though is build a reserve, which is something that has not happened in the township in recent years, or I'm not sure if it's happened at all. Some towns will have a reserve. It used to be just for snow, and the state's expanded that reserve for other things like natural disasters, and then during COVID they allowed the use of that. So any funds that DPW within certain lines that have not been expended, ordinarily they would roll into the reserve, and then they would, the general budget reserve, and then into the fund balance. What we could do is take those funds, rather than have them go into the fund balance, have them roll into a snow and emergency weather reserve, so that way we could build on that, and have a safety cushion in the event that there is an emergency, or whether it's a declared emergency or otherwise, that we can tap into those funds so as to not burden the general budget for that given year. And it's something that we'd like to do. It's good planning.
Are we making preparations for this budget to have that incorporated, or
We're, once,
consideration?
So come March, when things are wrapping up for the 2024 budget and we know what's left, that's when we'll be making the decision of whether we have, how much funds we have out of those appropriate DPW line items to roll into a reserve, and whether we want to do that or not, and just let them roll into the, the fund balance.
Fund balance, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say with the next two storms possibly in the next week or so, it's not letting up, but this is particularly snowier than seasons past around here. So anyway, I think they've done a terrific job of clearing the roads and keeping residents safe. So recognize how much work they've gone into it. It's just terrific.
The RDPW is really fantastic. They are very, very careful with how they not only just ensure safety on the roads, but how they manage overtime and their resources. The mayor and I were in close contact this weekend, especially with Saturday's storm, and you know, he got to hear from me firsthand on how they make that decision and how they try to make sure that they're not just casually sitting around waiting for a storm, incurring costs that are unnecessary. So we've got great supervisors there, but great crews that take very good care of the town's resources.
Yes.
And so, Mayor, that is it for DPW. Tax collector and tax assessor, any question on their reports? Okay, that concludes the workshop meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Shahadi.
Thank you all.
And now proceed to the second hearing of citizens. Mr. LeConte, is there anyone who wishes to speak online?
I do not have any hands raised.
Thank you. I now invite anyone, should they choose to do so, to come before the mic. I see no one, so I now close the second hearing of citizens. I ask if there's a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another good meeting.
Bad 1,000, huh?
Good night.
Recording stopped.
You guys take credit cards for the $25 fee?
Square, tap to pay.
Like,
Go home and get my
Nicholas
insurance.
stopping
Venmo,
everyone,
Greg.
but,
Yeah, I don't know.
huh?
Send it to the clerk, I want nothing to do with it.
I mean, I